Good afternoon. Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Miss Lizette. It's a pleasure to be here representing HSA and talking about a topic that's very close to my heart. So, we're going to be talking today about a number of different things. We're going to talk about acceptance, belonging, connection. Why do they form the cornerstones of our mental health? We're going to think about ourselves a little bit. And we're going to think about shame. That's a big topic. I could talk about that for hours. Discrimination, empathy, and then what are the connections to the APF work streams that are going on? Okay. So let's think first about belonging. We can talk intellectually about these topics, but really what we're talking about is our fundamental feelings of safety in the world, within ourselves, and in our connections to those around us, in our families, in our communities, in our organizations. Belonging is where we want to be and where we are wanted. And that second bit, where we're wanted, is extremely important, because we are not in control of that. That's the bit of belonging that is in control of those people around us. And that's fundamentally important to our feeling of belonging. That's very different to fitting in, which is where we want to be, and somebody doesn't care less, nobody cares less whether we're there or not. Or we're where we want to be, but we're hiding part of ourselves. And if we are where we want to be, but we're hiding part of ourselves, we are merely fitting in. We are not getting a proper sense of belonging in that moment. In order to belong, we have to belong to ourselves first. We cannot get a sense of belonging without some foundation within. We're taught belonging by those that we first belong to. Do we belong or do we not belong? And that's first of all in our families. To really belong, we have to be able to share our authentic selves. So let's talk for a moment about connection. That's the energy that exists between people when they feel heard and seen and valued. We all know connection. Many of us will have felt it today. It can be that one interaction that fills you up, that fills up your cup, and where we walk away feeling like we've got a sunbeam radiating from us. We've all had those kinds of connections. We can both give and receive without judgment in those kinds of connections. It's like where there's just this unsaid understanding of each other. And it's one of the nicest feelings that we can have when we feel filled up in that way. Acceptance is where it's a truly beautiful feeling. It's when we felt brave enough to share our authentic selves, when we've been vulnerable and we've maybe shared something about ourselves that we may not share with everybody, something where we don't quite know how somebody might react, where they could react positively or they could react negatively. But it's where we share that and we feel belonging and we feel connection because we have been accepted with those flaws, with those imperfections. Just like belonging, acceptance starts with ourselves. And what we're talking about there is self-compassion. And I don't mean acceptance of the nice bits about us, of the bits that we like. I mean acceptance of ourselves with every single imperfection that we own. And so many of us will hide those imperfections and think we can't be accepted with those. And yet when we're vulnerable enough to show those imperfections, to lean into those with vulnerability, then we are able to feel true acceptance and true belonging. Okay. So, why are these the cornerstones of our mental health? Okay. Excuse me. They define us, acceptance, belonging, and connection, from the moment we're born. They go on to create our inner voice. They become our blueprint of who we are, how we relate to ourselves, and how we relate to those around us. When our mother or father first holds us and looks into our eyes with their soft eyes, coos at us, counts our fingers and toes, they're telling us, you belong, we accept you. They connect to us in the most powerful way. When we continually hit up against our ability level at school, when we feel like we're not getting it or we're getting it wrong as a child, and our parent says, hey, you're doing amazing because you're doing your best. That's what learning is, and that's the beauty of learning. Then you're accepted with your imperfections when you're knocking up against them. When we're teenagers and young adults, and we expose our differences, our flaws, our mistakes, and our parents help us to feel seen and understood and help us through those mistakes. And they say, yes, I did that too. That happened to me. I was a teenager as well, and I made these kind of mistakes. Then they are connecting with us. These responses, these types of connections and acceptance and belonging builds our resilience so that when a storm comes, when we're in our boat, when we're knocked down, we feel like we have a hand to hold to get back up, or we have enough resilience to get first onto our knees and onto our feet by ourselves. And that's why they form the cornerstones of mental health. Because if we don't have that, if we don't have that acceptance and belonging and connection, we cannot get up alone. We can't do it, and we need to. And essentially what we're talking about there then is difficulties with our emotional well-being, difficulties with our mental health. Okay. Let's think about ourselves for a moment. What I'd like you to do is think about a time when you have felt so accepted, so connected with someone or a group of people or your family, so felt such a sense of belonging that it really filled you up. I want you to really, really remember that time. We all hopefully have one. It feels so good. It's like the warmest hug, coupled with a mug of hot chocolate with marshmallows, squirty cream, and chocolate sprinkles. It really is the very best feeling. Okay. Here's my public health warning, okay? And I'm wearing one of these, so I'm available afterwards if you need me. What I'd like you to do now is think about a time when you did not feel those things, when you felt you weren't accepted, you didn't belong, you didn't feel connection. We have, sadly, all felt those things too. I want you to think for a moment about the impact of that connection and belonging on you when you felt it, and what that meant to you, and what that did for your inner world, for your inner child, because the eyes that we look out of are still the eyes of our 4- and 5-year-old selves. They haven't changed. We are still in there as our 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old selves. And I want you to think about the impact of not belonging on you. Because when we think about ourselves, it's really easy to understand the impact of acceptance, belonging, and connection, because we feel it. They're felt experiences. It's also far easier to understand the impact of not feeling accepted, of not belonging, of disconnection. And then it makes it easier to understand mental health difficulties. So, let's talk about shame. Why are we talking about shame all of a sudden? Okay. It's because shame is what we feel when we don't belong, when we aren't accepted, when we don't feel connection. So I could try and talk about shame to you, but there's a lady called Brené Brown, who many of you will probably have heard of. She is a researcher. Thank you. You know her. She's a researcher into emotions. She's a sociologist, and she's one of my gurus. And she's incredibly good at talking about these topics. So I'm going to let her talk about shame to you for a moment. Please work.
The thing about shame that's so hard to talk about is we have a visceral response to the word. And shame is not a, let's study this and talk about those people who have it. Like, you have it, I have it, and no one wants to talk about it.
So define it. Is it what we all think shame is?
You know, it's, by definition, I think what emerged from the data for me is it's the deeply painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and somehow unworthy of connection, love, and belonging.
And everybody experiences this.
Everybody, it's a universal emotion.
Is it different from guilt?
Very different from guilt. So shame is really a focus on self, while guilt seems to be a focus on behavior. So shame, I am bad. Guilt, I did something bad. So just an example. I'm your teacher and I give you your test back and you get a 47 out of 100. Shame self-talk would be, God, I'm so stupid, I'm an idiot. Guilt self-talk would be, God, it was really stupid not to study for that. Man, not a good idea to go out last night. When we can focus on behavior, we are much more likely to respond with empathy and actually change. But it's like, you know, one of the questions I get from parents all the time is like, my kid lied to me. And so I looked at my kid and I said, you're a liar. And that's very shaming, right? You're a liar, not you told a lie and that's unacceptable and here are the consequences for telling a lie. When we call ourselves or other people liars or losers or, you know, stupid, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Where do you go from there? As opposed to, look, you're a great kid, but you lied and that's completely not okay. And here are the consequences for lying. And if it happens again, here are the consequences. So when we are able to separate a focus on self and a focus on behavior, we're much more likely to be able to change the behavior. If we catch one of our kids saying, you know, God, I'm so stupid, when they're doing their homework, no. You know, you can say, God, I'm confused, I'm lost, I don't know what's happening, but I'm stupid is not gonna work. We just don't talk to each other or ourselves like that in this house.
Okay, so Brené Brown does a really good job of talking about shame. And as she says, shame is not an us and them thing. Shame is an us thing. I have shame. I can guarantee that Miss Lizette Yearwood has also experienced shame. It's all of us. And when we can accept that, when we understand that we can all feel shame, we can give each other empathy, and that brings us out of shame. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But because we all have shame, when there is a circumstance that makes us feel disconnected, that makes us feel like we don't belong, that disconnects us, that unaccepts us, it digs into our shame no matter why we have that shame. It doesn't matter how the shame got there, it did get there, and so many different things can dig it out like a very painful spoon. Okay, so without acceptance and belonging, there is only suffering. So let's talk about discrimination. Okay. So this is so important when we think about mental health and the health of our island. Discrimination is the act of excluding a person or a group deliberately, not allowing them to connect or belong because of our personal, organisational, or societal beliefs about that person or group due to a characteristic of theirs. It's a deliberate act of disconnection, of unbelonging, of unacceptance. It causes intense suffering because of that, because it's the act of forming an obstacle between meaningful connection. It makes us feel alone, and it digs straight into shame, no matter why that shame is there. And that's why it causes mental health difficulties. So, who here has experienced discrimination? Thank you, everybody, for being so brave. I put my hand up because I grew up in a Middle Eastern country, and as a white woman, as a teenager, I was once spat at out of a bus. I don't know whether it's because I was a teenager, a woman, white, I have no idea why, but I knew in that moment it really took me aback, and I was like, oh, that's what people talk about when they talk about discrimination. That was one moment. And I think in that moment as a teenager, it woke me up to what discrimination feels like if that's done to you all the time, every day. So many people will relate to discrimination in terms of gender, colour, race, and age. When we hear about these forms of discrimination, we can relate to them because we are them. We can say, yeah, I am you. It's easier to discriminate from an age perspective when we're younger against older people because we're further away from that older age. The closer we get to it, the more we relate to it, the less we might discriminate. The further we are from being able to relate, the easier it is to other. And othering is at the heart of discrimination. It's easier to other, and then it's easier to not allow someone to be close to us or belong to us or connect to us. It makes it easier for us not to think about that person's internal world, about the impact of them not being accepted and not belonging. It allows us to easily create a barrier between their shame and our empathy, or our empathy and their shame. Remember, the shame is not there because of the reason we're discriminating. The shame is there because shame is there for all of us. But what discrimination does, what othering does, is it allows us to form a barrier between our empathy and their shame. It allows us to purposefully not connect. I just want us to think about that for a moment. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different types of discrimination now that makes it easier for us to other. One is mental health, and one is LGBTQ. So with LGBTQIA+, the name in itself allows us to other because people don't know what it means. The number of times somebody said to me, well, what the hell does this mean? What's IA+? Okay. And in all honesty, they can stand for so many different words. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, queer or curious, intersex or inquisitive, asexual or an ally, plus anything else. So I'm the A. I am an ally in LGBTQ+. Here on this island more than anywhere, because I hear and I see the impact of the disconnection, of unacceptance, of unbelonging on young people who identify within this community. People who are confused or unsure about their sexuality or their gender status. I had a really enlightening conversation with somebody at HSA, and they'd had a conversation with a young person who was curious about their gender status. They didn't know if maybe they were transgender and they hadn't been able to talk about it anyway, and it's causing them mental health difficulties. And this person sat down with them and said, well, tell me about it. Let's talk about it. He wasn't a specialist in this area, but he had a conversation, and that young person walked away feeling so much more sure about who they were because they were allowed to have a conversation. They decided they were the gender they were born. They decided that that was them. But if they hadn't had the ability to have that conversation, those mental health difficulties may have continued far beyond that room. So what we can do is stop ourselves from feeling so far removed from a person that we can't access our empathy. What we can do is think, actually, this person is suffering because they don't have acceptance, belonging, connection. And I have the empathy to help them with those feelings. Okay. So, empathy is the ability to say, I really hear that you're suffering. Oof, that's really tough. I'm so glad you told me. It's not the same as agreeing or condoning. It is not the same. We can do both. We can maybe not agree with something, but we can also be empathic. And understanding and agreeing are not the same thing. Understanding a person's suffering and using our empathy and leaning into that is the most important thing. And by doing that, we can help young people to feel like they belong, they connect, they're accepted in a community regardless. Let's go back to that feeling of unbelonging, disconnection, and unacceptance for a moment. Imagine that was our experience all of the time. Imagine that was our experience all of the time. And all we're longing for in that moment is to be seen, to be felt, to be heard, to be held. For someone to say, I see you, I've got you, I'm here. And we can do that. We can do that with acceptance of that person, of a human, from a human to human connection. Because that's what we all are in our daily lives. We all have something. People come into my room and they think because I'm a psychologist, I've got it all sorted. I've never had mental health difficulties. It's not true. That's not them and us either. I've been to counselling 5 times throughout my life. I didn't have belonging and acceptance as a child particularly. It affected my mental health. That's why I do what I do, because I see people. I see suffering in people, and it connects with me because it's what I felt. And that's why I'm so passionate that people aren't discriminated against for whatever reason. It's why I'm so passionate here on this island about helping mental health, about helping to improve outcomes. And it's also why I'm passionate about LGBTQ, because I can see the impact on mental health here. Being able to allow acceptance and connection and belonging allows our reduction in shame and theirs. When we're kind and compassionate to somebody, our shame reduces as well as the person we're giving it to. And as my daughter keeps saying to me at the moment, she's 8, having an 8 and a 4-year-old, she keeps saying to me, Mummy, kindness is free. I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's a totally free commodity. And how incredible in our world that we have something so powerful as kindness that is totally free for us to give. So at APF, we have a work stream. And on that work stream, it's taking a little while, but we'll get there. We're working to improve outcomes for young people who have mental health difficulties because of their sexuality status, because of their LGBTQIA+ status. At Alex's place, we are all open-minded. We are here for everyone, and everyone will be treated the same without any discrimination. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. It's lovely to talk to you.